Welcome to the wonderful world of wine. We are your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. You can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the wonderful world of wine. Every week, Kim and I are here to talk all things wine with you. We're broadcasting every week on Franklin Radio, WFPR 102.9 FM. How are you today, Kim?
I'm pretty good, aside from little winter head cold, which seems to be going around. But other than that, doing very well, thank you.
We can still talk wine when you have a cold, right?
We certainly can.
Okay.
And as our listeners probably know, we record every week or every other week. So right now we are recording in January, and we are trying to do a little bit of a dry January or a drier January in my house. But I felt like today I needed a glass of red wine. So this is my first glass of red wine of the new year.
Good.
Believe it or not.
There's a big push. We'll have to maybe talk about that in a future episode. I see a big push this year for the dry January. A lot of non-alcoholic beverages are coming out and promotion of low alcohol and no alcohol wine.
Yeah, I was going to say there are some definite new products out there on the market for if people are doing a dry January or are just trying to perhaps cut a little bit of their alcohol intake. Is their New Year's resolution or just for their general health?
We'll follow trends too, see if people did definitely, if they cut back or not, we'll know by the trends in the wine world.
That's right.
We'll report on that as well. So for our first article, Kim, we're going to talk an article that was in Demarge. We went back and forth how to say this, but Demarge.com, DMARGE.com. And it was an article that said, experts bust the romantic wine myth you probably still believe. And when I first read it, I thought, oh, okay, here we go. It's going to be something really out there, right? But it was talking about the fact that wines are meant to age and the kind of the myth behind that. And we've touched a lot on this in the past, Kim, but I thought it was interesting how they looked at this as a romance part of wine that people might not know about.
I actually liked that take on it because I teach about wine and I think about wine and I have a conversation with people about history and marketing and all of these things that go into wine appreciation that are not the actual flavor of the wine. This idea of romance of wine, I think, is really something that people might not necessarily think about, but is there when we think about how our perception of how wine is made, right? Like we've talked about additives or not, or the whole idea of getting your hands dirty and it's a product that's born in the vineyard. Just look at the visuals that are around wine marketing and wine commercials, especially, I think, with someone is walking through a grape, this whole field of grapevines at sunset, and it's all beautiful and this whole romantic thing. And I think that is a big part of people's perception of wine, is this romanticization of a lot of different aspects of it. And this one in particular that this article was talking about, I think really plays into that.
And they based it all on a tweet. And the tweet was this. It said, in quotes, 99% of wine should be consumed the same day you buy it or shortly after. And they're basing the whole romance and the myth of based on that once it's bought. And we've talked in the past also that we've saw a stat where most of the wine that is bought is consumed within 2 hours of it being purchased. So that kind of goes along. Yeah,
I think we debunked that one last summer.
Well, it was
close to.
Most of it is it's consumed fast. So I think that's what this is based on. And then it said the percentage of high quality to low quality on the store shelves can kind of be determined by that. My take on this is we talk about that 90% we see on the store shelves is made by big corporations. And then that 90% that they're making, I interpret as they make it to be consumed right away.
And I think that is absolutely true. And when you think about, there have been certainly times where we have discussed, as far as from a sales perspective, what is the percentage of the market that is wine in a certain price point? So we will often talk about, well, this much wine in this price category is sold. And as you get higher up the price scale, that percentage gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So we're looking at the vast majority of the wine that is sold in quantity is in that under $20 price range, or even in that under $15 price range. And it just goes with that style and that segment of the wine not population, but those bottles that they are meant to be consumed young, and you really don't want to hang on to them because they are everyday, not necessarily fine wines, but not saying that they're bad wines either. They can be really good quality, just not things that you need to hold on to for them to taste at their best. They're really meant to be honestly consumed when you get them home. So I don't think that there's anything crazy world shaking about this information, but I think it's something that people don't necessarily think about because you have that, like you were saying, that romantic ideal that, oh, wines should be aged. But the reality is that a lot of them really don't have to be.
And that's kind of the romance behind it. You buy a wine to celebrate something. It's at that moment, right? So it's not something you want to buy and you're putting it away. You want to celebrate something. You do it right away, right? You're drinking that wine. Kind of how I relate it to romance. But for our listeners, they gave a stat saying only 5 to 10% of wines will improve with 1 year of age, and only 1% improves with 5 years of age. So the vast majority you're seeing on the store shelves is not meant to be put down and aged, which we've always talked about in the past, right, Kim? I mean,
but I also think that it's important to say, like, okay, 1%. 1% of what? Is it 1% of total volume, or is it 1% of every single label out there in the market? And I think that could be an important distinction, because if you see, say, 10 bottles of wine in a store, let's say it's teeny tiny,
yeah,
and one bottle that's at $10 sells 10 times the amount of the bottle at $50, what are we talking about? Are we talking about 2 wines, or are we talking about 10 times a certain amount? So I think that it's important for people to understand that, we're talking about total volume here, and not
right
of the, different types of wine that are out there and available in the market.
So relate that to, say, a big box or a supermarket shopping, Kim, for wine.
Sure.
1% of the supermarket shelf, I believe, in that setting is ageable wine.
Right.
Would you agree with that?
I would say that 1% of the total volume of the wines that are in the supermarket are meant for aging.
Okay. I'm just making sure I'm on
I'm thinking volume.
Yeah.
That's what makes sense to me, because I think it's probably easier to quantify total sales by volume, because that's when we see that raw data in figures, you're not talking about total number of SKUs or total number of wineries or vineyards or brands. We're talking about volume. We always get those numbers in volume. So that's why I think that that they're talking about total gajillions of liters of wine that are sold every single year.
So let's give some examples of short-lived wines or long-lived wines. We've touched on this before, but I thought it would be good. You can also base this on a grape type, or you can base this on a price range, correct?
Absolutely. And I feel like this is one of those loaded questions, because, when people ask the question of how long can you keep a wine, it's hard for us because we're like, it depends on the wine. And then it gets really complicated. There's no simple answer to this question, because you can have a grape variety or a region in a less expensive price point that maybe will age a little bit better than a more expensive bottle that is made in a different style or from a different grape variety. So, say you have a $15 bottle of Bordeaux or $15 bottle of Cabernet from California, that wine may age longer and better than a $30 bottle of Rosé from Provence. So even though you've spent more money on that Rosé, it's still in 5 years' time might not be standing up to how much time has gone by as that less expensive bottle of red.
Right. It's a good point. But, just based on varietals, like what would you say is something you see on a shelf you don't want to, it's the romantic thing of picking it up for that night, but you don't want to say pick it up and forget about it and put it down. So, for me, I'm thinking like whites like Pinot Grigio, reds like Pinot Noir, some inexpensive Pinot Noirs, obviously.
Yeah.
That
So
type
the
of thing.
lighter, generally the lighter the wine, the less its longevity is going to be. So those lighter white wines, and I mentioned rosé a minute ago, some rosés certainly can age. They're not going to fall apart necessarily within a year. And I think that's another one that sometimes people argue over. But my general rule of thumb is if it's pink or white and it's less than, say, $15 a bottle, that is meant for pretty immediate consumption. And I really wouldn't hold on to it for too long. I mean, it's not going to hurt you if you age it. It's just not going to necessarily taste the way that it's supposed to taste. And I would say that that holds true for something like Prosecco as well. Don't necessarily want to keep those wines for any amount of time. They're meant to be consumed when they're fresh and fruity and have good bubble in them. And you don't really want to sit on them for very long.
For me and the listeners, Kim, when you hear wine and romance, what do you think of? What in the wine world or related to wine makes you put those two together?
So for me, it's what I was mentioning earlier, where it's this idea of the production of wine is all bucolic plants and leaves, and you're in touch with nature and the soil. And that we have this, I think, idea that making wine is a more natural process than maybe it is. But that's my perception of the romantic nature of wine, as opposed to maybe you're thinking Valentine's Day romantic. So that could be a completely different way of looking at it, and having maybe a really nice special bottle of wine with your sweetheart on Valentine's Day. Is that the direction you're going in?
No, that's what I wanted to bring it back to. I know you mentioned it earlier, and you were saying we always talk about people, though we kind of ruin the romance of the wine. We talk about all the geekiness and all the gross stuff that can be involved in the additives and chemicals and this and that. But I mean, that's the wine world. But to me, it all comes to the same thing. It's the story, right?
Yeah.
It's the story of how it's made, or how it's being made wrong, or how it's being made different. The story of who's making it, how did it get here? All of that to me leads to the romance behind the wine. It's the story of the wine. So,
but for me too, there's also that, I mean, once we've had a couple of glasses and the alcohol is loosening us up a little bit, and, there's the connection between drinking wine and poetry, and, we can converse a little bit better and a little bit looser when we've had a glass of wine or two. And there are so many beautiful quotes about wine is bottled poetry, and that there's this loosening of the mind and loosening of the intellect after we've had some wine, that I think is a really beautiful part of this idea of the romance of wine, because I feel like there are other alcoholic beverages that maybe make you feel a little bit different. Like they never talk about the romance of tequila or the romance of vodka. But there is this perception that drinking wine makes you happier and kind of more lovable, and loving your fellow humans, and having that buildup of relationship and conviviality that all gets tied to food and wine, and putting all of those things together. So I think that is also a big part of the romance of wine. You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine, and we are your hosts, Mark and Kim. You can find us every week on Franklin Public Radio 102.9. And you can find more information about Mark at franklinliquors.com. I can be found at commonwealthwineschool.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Wonderful World of Wine. And we are going to touch on one of Mark's favorite topics. Even though we are in the dead of winter, we are going to be talking about wine and pairing with yummy foods. And in this case, it's ice cream. Yeah. You love the wine and sweets pairings with you and your Girl Scout cookies and cupcakes and whoopie pies. And now we've got ice cream.
Yeah, and the listeners know we like to do things a little different here in the
We
wine world.
certainly
And,
do.
and ice cream right now is probably, what people are probably not thinking about pairing with wine. But I thought the Wine Enthusiast had a great article how to look at this, Kim. And what did you think as far as their take on? Do you think this is gross, Kim, as far as trying to pair a wine with an ice cream or?
Not gross. Because we certainly have so much history and experience with pairing wine with cheese. And, if you think about ice cream and other dairy based products, I mean, yes, it's frozen and yes, it's sweet, but I don't think that the fact that it's a cold treat should change the idea that, this has a lot of the ingredient components that otherwise really go very well with wine. So I might not necessarily be all on board with pairing particularly sweet foods like ice cream with wine, but I'm keeping an open mind because I have to say that recently I've been trying new combinations of wines and foods, and some things have really been surprising me. And so, I'm learning about myself that I need to keep a little bit more of an open mind about some of these pairings. So let's go for it.
Yeah, well, our listeners probably know that there's a lot of ice creams that can be topped with liquors out there, right? I mean,
Yes.
you see that all the time, but
Yep.
this article was drawing attention to, so why can't we pair it with wine if we can top it with liquor, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and you had mentioned, Kim, the frozen. I mean, it's a frozen food. And the key in all of this is to serve the ice cream where it's a little softened up so that the ice cream flavors can come out a little bit more. The
Yeah.
aromas of, like, same when we talk about the wine, to not serve it too cold, that it can open up a little bit. You can get some aromas out of it. The same things with the texture of the ice cream. When it's a little soft, it pairs a little better with the wine.
And
And we,
and for
yep, go
me,
ahead.
that is such an intuitive point, but that I never would have probably come up with on my own. Like, it's like once I read that, I was like, oh, of course.
Yeah.
Like, this follows the same, sets of guidelines that we generally give for food and wine pairings. And it was like, oh, well, of
Yep.
course,
I'm glad
have
you
it a
said that.
little bit, not super, super, super cold, and you will get so much more of those flavors.
I'm glad you said that because I want to pick out another thing I never thought of that made perfect sense to me too. It was a little later on in the article, but it said have fun with adding textures to the ice cream. So if the ice cream has add-ins like nuts or candies or something like that, that also plays into how you would pair it with the wine. And
Right.
I never thought of that. I'm just thinking the overall flavor of the ice cream. I'm not thinking what the add-ins would be and how that would
Yeah.
add texture that would go along with the wine that you're pairing it with.
Yeah. There was one ice cream that was mentioned in the article that was, it had like cookie bits in it. And it
Yeah.
made me think of our Girl Scout cookie pairing class that we did many, many years ago. And I was like, oh, yeah, that little bit of crunch and that differentiation of textures, because not only is the wine and the ice cream going to have a different texture from each other, but then you're absolutely correct. You add in that other layer and it adds more interest.
Was that the Italian butter cookie ice
It
cream?
was, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, wow, this is so good because you're working right into with the notes I had. They paired that with Pinot Noir, correct?
I thought they paired it with a rosé. I could be wrong. Let me see.
Whatever they
Oh
paired it
no,
with.
it was Pinot Noir rosé. So we're both right.
Why does this work? Why does that work? Do you feel Italian butter cookie? Right. To me, it's a little creamy, and it's obviously, I would assume, a vanilla ice cream, right?
Yeah.
Baked.
See, I can get the butter cookie, and the Pinot Noir. I'm still a little on the fence with a dry wine and a sweet ice cream, but I get the cookie flavor, because sometimes in Pinot Noirs, especially ones that maybe have just a touch of barrel aging, that little bit of vanilla, it's not
Vanilla.
an
Yeah.
overwhelming flavor in the wine. If it's done right, I feel like the balance between the berry fruit of the Pinot and the slight touch of oak from the barrel, you get this really nice blending of flavors. And I think that's what they're going for here, so that the cookie will highlight that little touch of vanilla that's been extracted from the oak barrel in the wine.
Yeah. So to me, like you said, they're playing on the vanilla of the Pinot with maybe the vanilla ice cream versus the butteriness. I was thinking you go with something creamy to go with the butteriness of the butter cookie, but I like the way they went with that. And you mentioned dry wines, Kim, and they had mentioned that dry wines work very well if the ice cream has a savory flavor. So thinking of that, what ice cream would you think has a savory flavor? Are you thinking something like I don't know, what's something that's kind of funky flavors?
There were fewer funky flavors in the American ice cream market than there are now. You know, we've had much more of an influence of flavors from Asia, flavors from other parts of the world that have worked their way into our ice cream flavors. Like you see matcha green tea all over the place.
Yeah.
You see olive oil ice cream from Southern Italy. There are herb ice creams. I've seen like sun-dried tomato ice cream. Like there are all of these other flavors that are really bringing in a savory note that I think now it's interesting. There are, there are these flavors that are really very wine friendly flavors. So sure, let's try a few.
So they mentioned some other kind of out there ice creams with wine pairings, and one of them was the Ben and Jerry's half baked, which is a chocolate vanilla so fudge brownie type of.
It's got brownies, and I think it's also got cookie dough in it. It's really good.
And they paired that with a late bottle vintage port, which it goes on that sweet type of thing. With a pairing. And they mentioned a coffee ice cream with a Solera sherry.
Yep.
Was another one, which I think works well.
Yep. I would do that. They said coffee or a nut-based ice cream. Yep. I think something like a pistachio ice cream with a sweeter sherry would be really good.
Or if it's a nutty ice cream, a tawny port would work very well, I think.
I bet that would be lovely.
And it would come, it's something with that is it warms up your palate. That tawny with a higher fortified wine, it kind of warms up your palate, and then it hits you with the coolness of the ice cream. I think that kind of works of the kind of the temperature difference in your mouth as well. And
what I like about this article too is that they focused on wines with some sweetness in them to go with the ice creams. And that for me is really what's going to make it, because those drier wines, those more tannic wines, they even mentioned that they tried a few of those and that it just was a complete disaster. So I really like that they're exploring the different flavor profiles that are available in sweeter wines. And sometimes I think consumers think about sweet wine as just being kind of monochromatic. They all are just sugar and not necessarily have different flavors with them, but there is a really nice variety of sweet wines out there. So you've got some that are nutty, some that are caramelly, some that are fruity, some that are different types of fruit. So I especially like that they talked about like Brachetto and Madeira and all of these other like really, honestly, really yummy things out there.
The Brachetto, they said with a berry or chocolate ice cream, for me, that is perfect with the strawberry ice cream.
Yeah. Brachetto and chocolate is really surprisingly good together.
So
like a chocolate tort or like a triple chocolate ice cream with Brachetto, I bet would be wonderful.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Did you have any, after you read this article, that you thought of pairing things with? Because I wrote down a couple that I thought of ice creams that would pair well with wines.
No, I didn't really get creative in my own brain. So I'm very interested to hear. Actually, no, that's not. I have one. I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, one of my favorite ice creams is definitely a seasonal ice cream, is eggnog ice cream. And we just passed all that, but I have my stash. Nice. It should last me for a little bit. But for me, and I did this one, Kim, eggnog ice cream with Vinsanto.
Oh, I bet that would be good.
It really, the creaminess of the eggnog ice cream and with the texture of that dessert wine was just great.
Well, one of these made me think, so there was one ice cream that was mentioned that I think was made with goat cheese to do like a savory. And then I was thinking that a more custard based ice cream would have that. And maybe it's similar to your eggnog ice cream. If you have an ice cream that's got an egg base to it and it's a little bit richer and a little bit creamier, it would almost hit your palate more like brie cheese. And then you could do something that has more of a creamy flavor and a caramelly sort of flavor, creamy texture to it. So something like a Sauterne or one of those sherries would probably be really nice as a not only a flavor pairing, but also a different textural pairing.
So nothing. So any ice cream pairings that you thought, you were talking earlier about the Pinot Noir, any others you thought of would work with a dry wine? Because you always
Not
go to
really.
that. You always go to that sweet fortified.
I know. I always go to the sweet. I
What
just
about-
I can't wrap my brain around the idea of a dry wine and a sweet ice cream. I feel like it would just make the wine taste kind of terrible.
Really? What about this? This is another one I had.
Oh, okay.
Cherry Garcia with a Valpolicella.
No, I'm not going there.
No.
I mean, yes, the cherry. So the cherry in it and the Valpolicella, absolutely, but not the sweetness.
What about if it was with an Amarone?
Mm,
A little more alcohol, a little more.
can I pair it with a port instead?
Okay, I'm trying to get you over on that
Amarone.
side,
All right, maybe I would. You know what? I would be more likely to try it with an Amarone, and that could be a successful pairing.
Okay.
All right, I'm keeping an open mind.
You are
keeping an open mind. I would try it.
open-minded this year with pairings. We're starting out the year good because you are getting more open-minded with my stupid suggestions at times.
No, you know,
like
it finally, like, the light bulb went off in my head with a spicy red wine and spicy food. Like,
See?
you've been telling me for years to do that, and I finally did it. And I'm like, Mark is right. This is a great combination. So I'm going to continue to keep an open mind.
Well, I'm glad. So not the time of year, but we love talking about pairings and
but we're New
ice
Englanders, and New
cream.
Englanders eat ice cream all year long. So
Yeah.
go get yourself a sundae, maybe a glass of sweet wine, see what happens.
Thank you for joining us today on the Wonderful World of Wine. We've been your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. If you want more information about Kim, please go to her website at commonwealthwineschool.com. For more information about myself, please go to franklinliquors.com. We're here every week on Franklin Radio, WFPR 102.9 FM. If you want our past episodes, you can find us on SoundCloud or iTunes. Cheers.
Why,